morning. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm Susan Cox. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'll start by taking roll call. So Michelle Weber.
Here.
Emily Secord. Doesn't seem like Emily has joined us yet. So can we go ahead and just begin the process, or do we need to wait for her?
You can go ahead and start the process.
Okay. I think that there's a lot to go through here. Camille, thanks for sending those other documents from the bylaws from other organizations. I haven't really had a chance to go through them in detail, but I thought maybe we could begin just by kind of summarizing where we are, why we're here, and just, I've also, one of the things that I printed out was the side-by-side document that Best had prepared. I felt like that was really helpful in terms of what's there now and proposed changes of the proposed new bylaw. So Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I too haven't really had a chance to digest the bylaws from the other organizations just at a glance, though they look like they might have some very helpful, maybe just some things we can utilize in maybe some other close fashion or incorporate. My major concern has always been, in how we kind of got here, has been the officer election piece. I'd really like to make sure we work through that one.
Mm-hmm. I think that was pretty much agreed to by everyone. Camille, you said you had also sort of looked at these and used those as a guide when this was being put together before. So you have some familiarity with them now, correct?
Yes. So, excuse me, when I originally created the bylaws, I did research across the nation for transit agency bylaws and pulled sections out that would be relevant for us. Right. I also, after Emily's request, reached out to all of I have a clerk group that is all of the transit agencies in the entire Pacific Northwest. And so I have 10 sets of bylaws that I received back from the transit agencies just in the Pacific Northwest alone that are fresh. I only sent 5 to you, but I do have those, and I have others that I've saved from California and whatnot from my initial research.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this information at some point is like drinking from a fire hose. So thanks for editing it down to us to something that's, more manageable. But Emily is still not here, right?
Yeah. No, she just jumped on.
Yeah, sorry, I got funneled in as an attendee, so apologies that I wasn't a panelist till now. So thanks again for fixing that.
Emily, we're just starting and we're thanking.
No, I heard everything. I'm good.
Oh, okay. Well then.
Thank you.
Onward and upward. Do you have any remarks just as we begin this?
No, I'm excited to dig into the ones that Camille has shared with us from the other agencies. And I think this is a great conversation to be having. And I don't think we have a timeline as far as like when we want to have this finalized, but I thought that might be helpful just to talk about kind of time frame. Is this a 2-month process? Is this a 2-year process? Do we have a sense of how long we want to take before we present this back to the board? That was my only kind of lingering major question.
One of the things that I've expressed before is that I personally feel like bylaws are an institutional document, and I think I have a difference of opinion from, I can't remember his name, the gentleman who was doing the training before, and when he talked about the concern that bylaws take a lot of effort or to change or to adjust. And in my mind, that's with intention, to figure out when you're doing something, what is it you're trying to fix? What is the problem? And, in a very thoughtful way, consider why something would be done. However, you can make changes to policies or procedures, and that can be done quickly. So to me, those are two different things, where the bylaws more are a reflection of the philosophy and how the governance of the organization. So, that is my particular perspective. I think a lot of the things that just tighten up language, I think that's a good thing. If we can just identify what it is that we want to change, frankly, I don't know that it needs to take a long time. I think it's there already. So we've identified that the election of officers, and it's election of all officers, right?
Right, right.
That
And then I don't know if this is where we want to have the conversation about attorney selection or removal and those types of things. I don't know if we, if this is the place to maybe incorporate that into either one of our procedure policies or the bylaws themselves.
Right,
I
right.
think we might want to add that into
Yeah,
this.
and so there's statutes that you'll run into that as far as what is the responsibility of the general manager and what is the responsibility of the board. And so when it gets into how an attorney is handled, regardless of who, level, you'll run into some statutes that will you'll have to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you'll help us with that, right?
Well, I mean, we can certainly send
Right.
you the statutes, and Camille, when you do that, send the statute that outlines what the responsibility of the general manager is for the.
Sure, I think you sent that recently, Camille.
So that's a good clarification, though, that was brought up. Maybe there's a discussion that this stays around bylaws, and then we maybe have like a running parking lot of here's what we recommend as a policy or procedure, so that we're not sort of commingling those two topics. Otherwise, I think we could get really in the weeds and never get this done.
Right.
Well, and ultimately, we'll have to have the review by legal to make sure that,
Sure.
you're not putting things in place that are against the statutes. So.
Right. But I guess one of the things that I want to discuss is the role of the board chair. Because there's a huge difference in what is being proposed compared to the current bylaws. And I think that I may be misunderstanding, but I believe that when Andrea talked about it at one point, or introducing it in the beginning of the changes, that it was to reflect practice. And I agree that I think that what's being proposed is reflecting what is the current practice now, but that's something that I would like to discuss. And in particular, and this was, something that Gina brought up at the meeting, at the retreat, the voting of the breaking of a tie vote be done by the general manager, and that actually is something by statute that isn't permissible. So at a minimum, that needs to be removed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not by statute. It's just bad practice. I mean,
Actually, I mean, someone sent me an ORS something that was a statute. So because the general manager position is a non-voting member, so then to bring them in as a voting member.
Well, yeah, either way, I don't like it just because it puts the general manager in an odd position with the board. So.
Yeah. I guess it was interesting that became a part of the proposed bylaw. So I think at least maybe the three of us can agree that that's something we would recommend be removed.
Yes.
Kind of two questions. Do we have a chair for this committee, and are we supposed to? Do we need to, or is it fine to just have the three of us sort of all co-committee members?
You should have a chair.
Okay, and then my other question is, do we want to tackle this from the top down from what we have currently or from the red line document, or do we want to pull it out and do certain pieces that are more of a heavy lift? Does anybody have a preference on sort of procedure of getting through this thing effectively?
I guess my preference is that we've probably gone over it enough that we know the big items that need to be addressed, and that we do that first. I would not be so excited about doing line by line of the, I just think that's not a good way to get through a document, but rather the practical implication or the particular issue. That would be my preference. And then even though, Camille, you sent us the track changes and everything, those were still sort of hard to follow just because there's so many pages. I found the side-by-side that Best sent to the board. I actually found that to be the easiest to look at and review because the actual language was in both. Michelle, do you have any feelings about that?
I did find that one easy to look at too. The only thing about that is that there was a redlined version that had some corrections in it from some comments that I had made from the first round of review.
Okay.
There were some
Yeah, but he would have
numbers that needed to be
access
changed
right.
and some things. So it's not completely reflective of the most current redline document is the only thing I would caution on.
Good point.
Okay. Do we all have a copy of that? Of the, not the red line, but the side-by-side that Beth sent? That's, I have tagged several of the areas that I feel like need to be at least reviewed by us.
And is it possible, Michelle, that you can share those edits? That way we're keeping those in mind as we're looking at the side-by-side.
Camille has them. I sent them before the November board
Okay.
meeting.
Camille, do you have something that combines Michelle's and Gino's? I think those are the only two that I've got whisperings that exist.
Yes, I'm pretty, I thought that they were included in this packet, but I will double check. I know they were included in the version at the last board meeting
Right.
that we brought
Yeah.
these.
They were in the last, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
So, and they
There's
were very,
also-
mine were very basic changes. They were changing, so the term limit was defined as something other than a 2 4-year terms or whatever it was. It was not indicative of what our term limits really are. And then there were a couple of the policies that were referenced in the bylaws were changed to reflect the correct numbers. They weren't like anything significant.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
I'm seeing those.
and as far as term limits, the term limit, there's actually no term limits other than what the governor sets. So there used to be none until Kitsaber came in and said, well, I'm only going to allow 2 terms for board members. And Governor Brown decided to continue that. But from a legal standpoint, there is no limit for terms of board members.
But the terms are 4 years, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are they 3 or 4?
2
Four.
4-year terms.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And Michelle, you didn't mention how you would prefer to go through it. Do you want to do line by line or paragraph by paragraph or by topic?
I guess my question just would be, how do the 3 of us feel about this new format? And then, when I compared this to the older version, it was basically the same items. They were just kind of, the wording was tweaked and I think it's more clear. So I guess my question is, are we all comfortable with this new format? And do we just want to dive into some of the more, the pieces that we've been struggling to manage?
Do we, do all 3 of
lately.
us have a copy of it in front of us that we can go through?
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with those changes. I think for me, it's just a matter of tweaking.
Right. Okay.
Sounds like topic by topic, and then maybe we do just a last minute kind of line by line, kind of a review the whole document and submit that for the board's
I
full.
kind of think as many versions as we've seen, I'm starting to get a little, overwhelmed and a little
Right.
blurred.
Right. Yeah, that's
I-
why I thought this side by side, it's not as complete, but at least it's something for us to work on as we're going through it. And then we can go from there to what is,
Right. So I might suggest then that when we're done here, with today's conversation, maybe Camille can go in and make the adjustments that I recommended in the email that I sent to them back before our November board meeting, sent to Camille and Caitlin.
You want those
Because-
made in the side-by-side version because they have been reflected in the actual bylaws themselves. Is that what you're
So
asking?
you made those changes in the version that was in the November packet,
Yes.
but this version that Best provided, the side by side, I don't think is reflecting those changes.
Yeah, they used an old version to
Yeah.
make that side-by-side. So, okay.
So
Got it.
I'm thinking it might just be easier for all of us to look at one fresh,
Right.
clean
Sure.
copy. So we're not continually trying to back and forth between all of the other versions.
So Michelle, which one are you proposing that we use, the red line in the board packet or the side by side?
I think if we use the side by side that Best provided, that has Gino's comments on it. And then if Camille can just incorporate those, they were just edits, like corrective
Yeah.
edits that I identified. If she can, if we can incorporate those into the side by side, then we can just be looking at one version and maybe simplify it a little bit.
so just to confirm, we're using the side by side as our working document. And the changes will be reflected in that. And then obviously at some point it will go into, the real proposed changes that we're going to present.
Right. So I think if we just move everything into this one
Right.
side by side document, everything we've done previously just gets moved into this one. And then we take one final scrub of that document after we've gone through
Right.
the process of defining whatever other changes we want to make.
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think we
My
all,
ramblings.
I think we all know what we're talking about. And we agree. Okay. So why don't we go through there? And if someone has, I don't have any proposed changes or issues of concern until we get to, actually, these aren't numbered, so who knows what page this is on.
Maybe just give us like the
I-
1.1 or
You
2.4.
need to back up and elect a
Yeah,
chair.
I will.
Thanks, Mark, for keeping us
Yeah.
honored here. Does anybody want to be the chair? I'm happy to do it if nobody wants to, but I'm also happy
Yeah,
to.
I think we,
assume that duty.
I think, were you on when we talked about, I would do it and I'm happy to continue, or
Susan, it is.
not?
I nominate Susan Cox to chair this committee.
I will second that.
Okay,
Discussion, anybody? Okay. Susan, you want to call the vote?
okay. It seems odd to, yes. Please signify by saying aye
Aye.
if you agree.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay.
You're
I want to be
official.
conscious of time because we can get into a real time suck here, but so my first topic to discuss was 2.6.2. And that was about the harassment, the discrimination, and so on.
Mhm.
And I don't know if what was proposed is new. I think that, I mean, obviously that seems pretty self-described. When it talks about the resolution handbook and the policy, are they going to be are they going to complement one another? Are they the same?
So the previous structure of the bylaws included all of the policies that the board adopted to govern themselves
Right.
as addendums. So what I did was I pulled all of those policies out and I'm off of the bylaws as addendums, and I'm just putting them into a policy handbook just for purposes of organization. That way, the bylaws don't need updated every time the board decides to adopt a new policy to govern themselves. And it's just cleaner. The bylaws can be more standalone. They'll reference policies, but the policies aren't in the bylaws.
Okay.
So can I just clarify on that, Camille? If we adopt a new policy or we remove a policy, then we would need to amend the bylaws, right? To add or remove that policy?
Yes. But yes, we would add that reference into the bylaws. So apologies, correct myself.
Right.
We would add the reference into the bylaws, but the bylaws wouldn't be a very long document as they were before.
Right. And it would just be the adjustment of adding
Correct.
that policy in to the reference. So
yeah,
but it would make it
typically,
easy.
I mean, typically you won't, eliminate policies. I mean, you might, more often we revise policies and eliminate them or add new ones, right? And so it kind of simplifies the process, I guess.
Right. It makes it much easier just to amend policies as we go. But I just want to make sure that we're clear that if we did add or remove one, we would need to amend the bylaws to include or remove it.
Yeah, and the way that I've seen that work, Michelle, in the past, and you're probably familiar, is kind of compiling those and say, okay, every 6 months we say, oh, we added or modified or removed. We want to approve all of those bylaw changes at the same time.
Right. Yeah, just so we know that that's something we would want to at some point
Great.
do.
So Susan, are you fine with 2.6.2 with that policy being kind of?
I was just asking for clarification and to make sure that and it sounds like they do. On 2.6.4, use of the district resources. I'm wondering if that's not going to be, if that doesn't need to be changed or to reflect the new law that went into effect about the per diem.
So that policy actually doesn't have anything to do with board compensation. That is specifically, I think it was about 5 years ago, the board wanted to adopt a policy regulating the board members' use of district use of staff and resources. Like if a board member wanted to use a bus for some event or something of that nature. So it's completely separate from the compensation.
And there is nothing in here. Well, I don't mind waters.
But then it goes down to no compensation for service or board-related expenses. Is that where that could be relevant?
I couldn't quite catch all of that. I'm sorry. You kind of broke up a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. 2.8, no compensation for service, board-related expenses. Would that need to be updated?
I believe that is part of the compensation, and that is, or that part of that policy, compensation policy, and that is being updated. That whole policy is on hold at the moment, pending the House Bill 2992 that passed. So yes.
Okay.
Is it appropriate for us to maybe help guide that discussion? I know we were waiting for some more information, but maybe we can start, at least make a recommendation of what that could read, or maybe we put that at the end of our collaboration.
You guys can absolutely use this committee to also look over all of the board's policies that have been developed and adopted. That's absolutely reasonable.
can we put that aside as something we may want to discuss and make a recommendation to the board, full board, or
I
not?
think that would be really helpful to have, you know, just even just a, here's what we're understanding, here's the feedback we've gotten from Andrea, here's our past discussion, here's what we might want to say. And then maybe say this part's in the bylaws and this part we'd suggest going to policy and procedure.
Okay.
And we do have a meeting with TriMet and Salem to kind of discuss that issue and how they're handling it and whatnot. So we'll certainly bring more information back to the board on that particular topic.
Okay. Please weigh in here. I'm just going through my list. When
So
we got,
if you go back, I think it was 2.6.2, the one with district resources. What you might want to consider there, $50 is not very much, right? And so you might want to consider, increasing that to $100 or whatever. I mean, but it's up to you.
This is one of the places where it seems like, would this be in policy where, excuse me, not policy, but more procedures where when it's appropriate, those numbers are increased to reflect what is more relevant? Or does it stay here in the policy?
Yeah, I think on this particular one, the policy, I mean, there's just kind of outlines of policy. It isn't the entire policy. So that's
Right.
why, you kind of reference a policy. And so, you can, decide if you want more or less in the bylaws, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing to talk about. Mark, can you give some examples of what that would be, how it'd be used?
It's not used very often, to tell you the truth.
Right.
I mean, and so, we have had board members request certain documentation that takes a lot more time than would be normally expected. And so, this says, well, if the request is more than what's outlined here, more than 3 hours staff time, or costs, excess of $50, then, it should go to the board. But that's, it's really more about information, than actual other costs, right? So.
Something else to consider is the bylaws don't have to reference board policies as they do now in the structure that I developed. They can be a completely separate standalone document, and you can have the policies all be in a separate handbook. That could be cleaner. It's up to you, but just something to consider.
My concern, Camille, and I think you're kind of touching on it, is that if we have policy that's conflicting with the bylaws or bylaws that are conflicting with the policy, that just makes a lot more to manage. So for me, it's like, if we have it's something that we feel really strongly about, it should be in the bylaws, and the policy should just support the bylaws. So if there's a way that we can sort of take out areas of confusion or messiness, I think we should. But I don't know what the proper solution might be until we work through this a little bit more.
We could simply state in the bylaws that there is a policy handbook, and we don't have to individually reference each policy. That could be a little cleaner. So that way, when policies change and the policy handbook gets updated, the bylaws don't have to be touched at all.
Yeah, I kind of like having the policy referenced in the bylaw. That way, if there is something that should be updated, it happens at the same time. So at least if there's a possibility of conflict or confusion, we could address both of them at the same time. We just have to not change any policy names, so then we'll be fine.
Right.
Yeah, and it connects the bylaws to policy, which is, I
Right.
think is important, so.
Yeah. So if Michelle has a question and I agree or disagree with her, I could say, well, the bylaws says this and the policy says that, and then there's no issue.
Yeah.
Silly example, but. Okay.
So do we want to increase 2.6.4 from $50? Is it the amount of dollars, or is it actually more the time required?
It's a reflection of the staff time used. So if we have a staff person that makes, and this is completely random, $15 an hour, it's approving using up to $50 worth of their time.
Well, and I think we should be careful that it's got to be inclusive, right? So it says 3 hours or excess of $50. So, it could be something we've never even thought of, where they say, I'm going to borrow, to Mark's example, borrow a bus for an hour, and that's, bus driver's time, but it's also a huge resource that maybe we don't want the board to be able to borrow a bus or use the car wash or whatever without board approval. So I think both numbers should stay in there, the hours and the dollar amount. $50 does seem low, but it's sort of a clause that says, let's make sure we know what's going on.
Yeah, we've never really come up against it. So, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal either way, but, it's just happened to be there. And I think it is, 3 hours or $50. So it isn't just time. It's
Or
also
cost, yeah.
other costs. So, yeah.
Is there anything that you guys can think of where, what does the public think of this? And how do we, make sure that we're maintaining clarity of, if Michelle, you want to use the bus car wash and it costs X number of dollars for the organization to run that, is that something the board should approve, or is it, $150 because everything's expensive now? I don't know. I kind of think just leave it until we run into something that causes us to say, man, it's really time to update that number.
Right. I guess one of the things that I just looking at that, I sort of question, it seems like this would be something that the general manager can manage, rather than the request having to go to the president and then that it's voted on by the full board. That seems a little more in the weeds and management related than is necessary.
Yeah. And
Mark,
also the board compensation is going to maybe be a factor there too, where you say, well, Susan, I don't want you to spend 10 hours researching XYZ when a staff person could do it. So I think we could run into some other unexpected circumstances. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, I think it goes back to, I think it's in the same vein to me as a general manager breaking ties to the board, right? Now you have a general manager deciding what a board member can do rather than the board, managing themselves, right? And so, I can say, well, okay, yeah, we're going to let Michelle do this because, it's not that big of a deal. Another board member comes up and I say, well, no, because, it's different. So I'm not going to allow it. It's like, that's pretty dicey for a general manager. And, and so, so I think, board needs to govern themselves on certain things.
Right. But also there is the fact that a board member has the right to request information. That's part of their oversight and governance role.
So can I just ask, in context of, so I've asked to meet with Christina to talk through some of the pension trust committee, just to kind of get caught up to speed, right? So that is staff time. So that would be part of this use of district resources, right? Technically.
Yeah, but that's, I think that this is, pertains to things that are not in a normal, kind of process of your duties, right? You go to board meetings and you meet with me and you meet with staff, and, that's just part of doing business. And so I think this actually refers to more requests outside the normal, right?
So do we maybe just need to clarify the intent of this this portion? Do we just need to put some wording in there that specifies that this is outside of normal, whatever normal is, or
Defining
staff
normal.
interaction?
Yeah, for example, Michelle, I can't imagine why your meeting with staff is something that would go to the board. I mean, to me, that
Right, I know, it makes no sense.
No,
So I
that's
think
exactly right.
we just need to make sure we understand the intent.
So, and this
of
is
the
a place where we might go to the actual policy
Yeah.
and say, what does the policy say and what is its intent? If it's covered there and this is just supposed to be a synopsis of that, that's fine. Yeah, I think the intent here is things that are outside of the normal scope of business.
Okay, so I think we can, I would agree that changing it to $100 probably isn't unreasonable. Just, I mean, given the time difference between when that was first set and when, what we're having as a discussion today, I think that's a reasonable adjustment. But I think we want to maybe focus on the policy as opposed to.
Yeah, so this is actually a pretty short policy. And so for the sake of organization, because there are a lot of structural changes with all of this, and it has been a lot of information, I wonder if it might be valuable to, at the next meeting, maybe have it be for the purpose of looking over all of the policies, because I think it is kind of hard to determine what needs to be updated or changed based off of the short summary synopsis that's in the bylaws currently. And it may be helpful to be able to look over the whole policy to understand the context before proposing changes based off the summary.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So I think that this is one that we need to flag to look at the whole policy. And because Mark, I'm glad you brought it up, but to be honest with you, I am much more confused than before. And it's not to me so much about the money as it is guidance for the board about what do we do, at what point do we have to go through the board and say, is this okay or not? Or does the general manager have the latitude to make those decisions? I think to me, that's something that, and maybe it's in the full policy, but as it's described here, I find it confusing.
Yeah, and to your point, it could be, this takes 2.5 hours, but this person's pay is over $50. So now it's right. So I would actually be in favor of removing the dollar amount and just saying any unusual expenses that are incurred, including staff time, then we review it. I think maybe there's a way to simplify it rather than get more detailed.
Yeah, I think it's the activity as much or more than. Okay, so that's one that Camille, we're gonna flag to look at more. The next one I had was the 3.1, and here we go. This is the election of officers. We know we want to change that. Do we just put that aside for the bigger conversation and then we just go ahead and go through the rest of this? And I mean, I'm just talking about the ones I flagged. So if the rest of you have other things.
I think it's helpful, Susan, if you get through all of your question marks, because it might cover all of mine and Michelle's, but
sure.
Not when at the end we can jump in with our other.
Okay. And so then I also have flagged 3.3, and that's the authorities and responsibilities of the officer position. So I'd like us to spend some time with that. And then 3.3.1, and that is that's the president. I'd like us to talk about the changes from the prior policy to what has been proposed. As well as then 3.3.4, and that's the secretary. I mean, is that really true? Does that reflect reality that the secretary does all of this? Isn't that Camille?
So it states, so yes, that position is real. And those responsibilities are real. For each position, just as with the treasurer, that officer has the option to delegate those responsibilities to a staff person. So those have been delegated to the clerk of the board, just as the treasurer responsibilities have been delegated to the finance director.
Should that be noted?
It is.
It
noted.
is.
Yeah,
It's the last
sentence.
sentence of that paragraph of
Got it.
3.3.4.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I like the bullet points rather than just the one paragraph. Would that be? I know that's just a function, but
By that, Susan, you mean breaking out these duties that
Yeah,
are specified in
that-
here by bullet point instead of
Right.
paragraph? Is that what you're trying to say?
yeah, the one that is to the left, 5.4.
Okay.
Does that make, how the rest of you feel about that?
Sorry, jumped around a little bit. So you're saying, did you say
So on
3.5.4?
On 3.3.4, it says secretary. On the left, it has 5.4, which apparently is how it's written now. I find that one easier to read.
So maybe just a reformatting that I don't feel like is a huge issue.
Again, that's, yeah, it's cosmetic. And then what about the board meetings, LTD board meetings? Because that's changed a bit. Do we need to, are all those okay, or? I mean, there's a lot more in the revision. Is that necessary, or do we feel comfortable with what was previously 2.1 or is currently 2.1?
Yeah, I actually have a question. I'm sorry, as we're just looking at the board meeting, the first paragraph on the red line, there's a lot of statutes in here, and I'm not sure, are the statutes, more like the policy that we're just referencing them because it's nice to have them sort of captured in one spot for reference, or do they actually need to be in the bylaw? I just want to, because if those change or those get edited to like have an A or another, .1, .2, then we'd have to update our bylaws as well. So I'm just trying to figure out, of course, we're following the statutes in the bylaws. So why do the statutes need to be in there?
So the majority of the bylaws is all statute.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so it's not, the specific statute isn't necessarily always referenced specifically under each section. It is under a good majority of them, but that's really what the bylaws are primarily made up of, is all of the statute and law that governs the board.
Sure.
And that's kind of what the bylaws have been, is a compilation of all of that information into one document so that the board members aren't having to go and figure out what statute is relevant and what section of each statute is relevant or not.
Michelle and Susan, do you have an opinion about having them in the paragraphs within the bylaws as opposed to kind of referencing them as we've sort of proposed for the policy and handbook?
I think it's easier to read if they're referenced somewhere else. Having it all in here, I find it hard to follow. I mean, the assumption is that we are in compliance with all of that. And if we're not, that's a whole different issue. Michelle, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm fine either way. I mean, if it simplifies it to take it out and put it in a policy instead, that's fine. I think that the only thing I would say is that for a newer, someone who hasn't necessarily served on other boards that are tied to statute requirements, they might, it might be, I would just want to make sure they had access to that so that they knew where to
Yeah.
go if they needed more information.
No, I agree. I don't want to lose it. I just wonder if it needs to be like as part of the language. So I like how at the bottom of it says like, go see number 52, rules for meetings of the Lane Transit Board of Directors. And then maybe it can say and reference ORS 1, 2, and 3. Because otherwise I'm just looking at this like do I need to read the statute to understand this bylaw, or am I just in compliance with the statute and I'm just referencing it in the bylaw? So just, I think it creates some clarity of this bylaw is not a statute, but it is
Right.
in compliance
Right.
with.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Susan, sorry.
Then I was at the 4.1.4 about the executive meetings. And I don't know if these are changes. But I did want to review that. One of the questions I have about, and again, this goes to a much broader authority of the president, that they decide who may attend executive sessions rather than that being a broader board decision. So that was one of the ones that I'd like to review. And then director preparation for meetings. Let's see, where was it? Directors should anticipate the need to seek legal guidance on matters listed in the agenda prior to the meeting. I think this is something that, clearly being prepared to participate and everything is important. But I'm wondering also if there can be something to make this a bit less burdensome. And I don't know if this goes in policy or not, but is there a time that for example, the information is given to the board, like how many working days prior to the meeting, to give adequate time to really review the documentation? I know I struggle with that. Maybe I'm the only one, but when it comes in as 300 pages or 200 pages, that's a lot to get through and to feel like you've really understand that's what's going on, especially if you're then supposed to contact the president or the general manager in advance of the meeting to express anything that you want to have reflected in the meeting. So maybe that's just me and I read slow, but.
I will offer, Susan, as you get more board packets and kind of go through them, you'll be able to kind of look and see what's really important and what isn't, right? I mean, you don't have to go through every page by page, every time. And so, it'll get easier.
So I just will say, if Susan's anything like me, my highlighter is how I read. So I kind of have to print that packet to even identify what's important or not important. And I think it's all important, but what I really need to focus my attention on, I kind of skim through that, and my highlighter is where I put okay, this is where I want to really, make sure I am aware of, kind of thing. For me, I can, I have some access to a printer at work that I can use for some of that, but for me, it's just hard to review that many pages on a computer.
It's a matter of style. And
do you guys know that you can ask Camille to print?
Yeah.
Stuff for you? Okay, just to make sure.
Yeah, and I print mine at work, so I can do that. But like for Susan, I guess what I'm saying is I understand her struggle because she's not necessarily. So yeah, I would say we need to utilize that resources, Camille printing those for us, if that's helpful.
But I also just think that maybe it's easier, some of the reports, and we get them a number of times, if they can be separated out. I realize this isn't policy discussion, but the data be, the actual summary of the information, that be in one place and maybe one document that is easier to print out. And then the other things that are more marketing material that have a lot of color and so on, that be in a separate, that they're just separate documents. So you don't have to scroll through the whole thing. You can just pick and choose.
So that's a matter then of.
It's not policy, it's just.
Right, but those are posted on the website as one, big document.
Right.
Right. And so for reference as well, and not everybody realizes this, every meeting packet that's a PDF, well, they're all PDFs. They all have bookmarks on the left-hand side. You can open the bookmarks and every agenda item is bookmarked. So you don't have to scroll through the whole document. You can specifically jump to any specific part that you want to see.
Yeah, I think you guys are talking more about printing though, rather than,
Okay.
no, yeah.
Well, and just the number of pages to get through. And I get what you're saying, Susan. So, but I don't know if that's something we incorporate in here, or if we just kind of find a way to make that easier.
Yeah, so I think
just-
the crux is that in preparation of the meeting, not only do you have to get through the material, but you also have to reach out with your, intelligently worded questions
Right.
to the appropriate person and assume that they respond in time. So I think, it does say, anticipate, your needs, and when possible, seek counsel, and when possible, reach out to the appropriate staff folks. Is that just maybe worded too strongly and we need to say, the preferences to do this, or what are you guys getting at for the policy itself?
And I would add to that, do we just reach out to staff, or do we reach out to staff with a copy to the general manager? What are the logistics of that? Because, Mark might want to, or who, our new general manager might want to know what questions we're asking ahead of time too, to help facilitate the conversation. So
I think in the one on the opposite, the 7.6 meeting preparation, I think that is pretty clear. And it's, maybe we want to put in there something that says that, a minimum a day in advance or something like that. But then when you go to the 4.2, a lot of this doesn't seem so much as policy as it is practice of not regulation, but just protocols.
setting expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so is it a bylaw or is it a preference? That's a good question. So should it be policy or should it be bylaw, right? So if it's bylaw, then it's like, you can't do this without, board approval or bylaw revision. So maybe it's just sort of softening this to say, here's the preference, or taking it out in a way that references a policy instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
is there anything, Mark or Camille, that's in that 4.2 that is statute, or is a standard operating procedure, or is a statute? Does that make sense?
You're muted, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's really intended to make the meetings go smoothly. So it's a matter of, most bylaws is how do we as a board want to operate, right? And so the purpose of this is really say, okay, here's how you should prepare for meetings, and here's how, if you have questions, you should ask them in advance, and and all those kind of things. I mean, it's just a matter of how the board wants to operate. Now, the board says, well, none of that stuff's really important to us. We're just going to wait to the meeting and have a free for all. You can do that, but I think there's just some processes that help meetings run more smoothly. So
yeah, well, and I guess I'll push back a little bit on that, Mark. I think free for all is sort of a loosey-goosey way to put it, because sometimes we're asking questions because we want the information shared publicly, because it's something that's really beneficial to the organization or to the community, or there's something that's maybe a little bit of a touchy subject that's just better to have that sort of sunlight on, if you will. So in some cases, we actually lose some, opportunity to connect with the public because we're not having that question that's an email in advance of the meeting ever addressed in a public meeting. And so I think there's a little bit of an issue there on that front.
I don't think it's an issue, to tell you the truth, because you should still ask it in advance. So staff knows it's coming, and you can then again ask it in public meeting, but that way we're prepared. Yeah. Number one.
So that's a great clarification. Really good point.
Yeah.
But in 7.6 in meeting preparation, that's there. General manager, you get the materials, asking questions of the general manager prior to the day of the meeting, if possible, after discussion. So I think, to me, that is bylaw. 4.2, I think it gets more into policy.
Good.
Yeah, I kind of feel like some of the items in here are to address maybe some issues that have happened in the past and, you know, trying to set some expectations of procedural processes as opposed to, you know, obligations and roles and responsibilities.
I mean, for example, to the greatest extent possible, seeking legal advice from the board counsel should be avoided in a public meeting in order to protect the attorney-client privilege. I mean, I think a lot of, I don't know, I feel like what's already there is adequate. I think being more specific with the policy and that be a part of the way that the board is supposed to, you know, just, you know, part of the board training. I mean, that whole guideline that we have of board activity and how to work and operate. I think that's where that's where this should go.
And I think, Mark, correct, if I think this portion is referenced in one of the policies in the board GM agreement somewhere, maybe. I would have to find it and double check.
Yeah, I think it was in that 2004 board GM agreement kind of.
Yeah. So I kind of agree. I think maybe I kind of feel like this can come out and be maybe referenced as a policy, and we can beef up that policy.
Right.
And I think we can add some communication pieces and some other things into that policy that would help us maybe operate more efficiently.
So that is everything that I had flagged. Except,
do we, Michelle, do you want to go through your list, or do we want to just tackle Susan's and then go from there, just so that we're making progress?
You know, I think I probably had a lot of the same concerns Susan did kind of going through this. You know, I think we have some definite areas which we've all identified we need to focus our major energy on.
you know, one thing I'm sorry I had flagged, and that's 4.3.2, and that's the serial communication. And again, I think so much of the descriptive in there is policy. It doesn't need to be included. It's certainly something that the board needs to be aware of, and, you know, maybe more training or whatever. But I think to stick with the 9.2 serial communication is makes more sense to me, and the rest of what's in 4.3.2 is in policy.
I think we're on the right track of having a policy review after this, just to see what should live where. I think that's going to be kind of a bigger piece of this project than I expected. So I'm glad we identified that already. Thanks, guys.
Why don't we go ahead and if there are other things, instead of just get them all added to the pile, if there are other things that either of you think should be addressed. I need to go through here and get these page numbers. I'm totally confused.
I think we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the comments that Gino shared. You know, we need to probably look through those and make sure that we're addressing those too.
I'm not sure that I saw that. I read the email where he said, I put this into the previous document, but I could never figure out where it was in that previous document. So
yeah, his two concerns were primarily, one was the general manager breaking tie votes with the board. You know,
already said,
yeah, and then the other one was board meeting attendance. Because I think there was some things that were pretty hard and fast in the bylaws. He goes, you know, and as we're looking at, you know, maintaining some virtual opportunity if people are out of town or whatever, you know, we want to make sure that that's reflected.
Yeah, I think those were his two, but he had some concerns about under ad hoc committees and under Article 6 general manager, I just want to make sure we're paying attention to his questions and incorporating them into our conversation and addressing them as we need to.
And we'll make sure you have all of his, we can pull them out and make sure that you have his.
Yeah, and maybe that's just part of that
The refresh.
version after today's discussion, with maybe just providing us with a really clean copy of the side by side so that we can, you know, in including Gino's comments and just making sure we have all of it in one spot so we're not missing something.
Yeah,
Well, if
because
anybody
Rob
else-
didn't have those, you know, when he put this together, you know, he didn't have the latest version, so.
Right,
Sure.
right. So just making sure we're dealing with that, and we're, you know, just maybe trying to nail it down into looking at one document so we're not missing something important.
Yeah,
And I would say, I don't know if this would be helpful, but based on our comments about printing, but maybe for our next committee meeting, we also get a printout of all of those policies or that handbook. Just because I don't know if I have a copy handy.
So
I think that
I
would be
have
helpful.
copies. I have copies of all the policies from a previous
I do
meeting.
too.
Yeah.
But
You have a printed copy?
I do. Yeah, from the, I don't know, September, October, they were included in that original
But on
bylaws
board
discussion.
and board orientation, it was given to us and printed out and stuff, so.
So maybe Emily just needs a copy sent to her of all of those policies.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a binder in my at my house, so I will look and see if I have it there. And if I don't, Camille, I'll reach back out to you.
Camille, would it be possible to, when you do this, could you put page numbers on? Because I have no idea. I'm flipping back and forth here, so I'm not sure what is what, so.
Absolutely.
The
Thank
side by
you.
side.
Is it a policy or is this bylaws? For example, I think it was maybe Don talked about previously, there have been other committees. There was a personnel committee or I can't remember what were some of the other committees. Is that something that is a policy or does that go into the bylaws?
Like a
I'm not quite understanding the question. Are you asking if it's a policy to
I mean, I'm
have
saying-
other committees or?
Well, there is no committee. I mean, the standing committees, is that a policy or is it bylaws that there should be a particular number of committees? To me, it seems
Oh,
like there's
okay.
a lot of committees.
it's a decision of the board.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
board decides what committees they have. I mean, we used to have HR committee and they disbanded that. We used to have a service committee that I think we've disbanded that. So every board decides what committees are important. And, you know, if they want all decisions to be made at the board level or if they
Right.
want to have committees work on different things. So,
Okay. I think maybe that's just a discussion for a future board meeting. Because I have to say, and a lot of it's because new general manager search and the new bylaws revision and all that. But there have been boatloads of meetings lately. And if there's some way for us to, and you know, for the staff, I know you have to prepare for each one of those. And so how can we, you know, maybe look at that and some efficiencies, so.
yeah, and I think generally, you know, committee meetings are intended to shorten regular board meetings, right? Because you do some work at the committee level and, you know, bring recommendations to the board rather than, you know, at some point, you know, those decisions have to be made and discussed and, you know, rather than extend board meetings out to 4 or 5 or 6 hours, which they used to be, you know, their committee work actually helps expedite the board meetings, so.
Right.
And Susan, from the bylaw standpoint, 5.1 and 5.2 or Article 5 doesn't really say how committees are deemed standing or ad hoc. And so maybe just some clarity on that piece.
Committees, yeah. So that was what, 5 point?
I would say it was just Article 5, just, it's pretty
Okay.
short,
Okay,
like how to disband a committee, how to, I don't know, if there's like some just brief language we could put there.
okay.
I think this is a pretty good list to start from. I probably have a couple more here and there, but I don't feel like they're urgent and may be addressed with some of the things that are already on the list.
Right. I'm also looking at 4.4.4 email meetings. Is that bylaws or is that policy?
It's a regulation of public meeting law.
So that wasn't there before at all. Telephonic attendance.
So what's your concern there, Susan?
Well, I just, again, this goes to, I think that I feel like bylaws should be pretty streamlined. And they are sort of the heart and soul philosophy of an organization. And then the detail, a lot of the detail which is in here, I think goes into more of a policy. That's just my.
So are you saying that you'd like to see these bullet points
Some of
moved out
these-
to a policy and referenced as a policy?
I think it's up to discussion. Like the
Yeah.
email meetings, maybe something briefly to describe email meetings, but this goes into a lot of, and then you do this, and then you do this, which is, to me is policy detail, not bylaw detail.
Yeah, and I think, in my opinion, this email meeting section is a little bit concerning because we also have the serial communication section just above it. And so it's not having some clarity around, is this appropriate time for discussion or is this inappropriate time for discussion? I think would actually maybe cause us some potential headaches down the road. So maybe it's sort of an email meeting is not used unless it's, X, Y, Z. So I think just if we're keeping all of these things in there, we want to just get clarity around it.
Yeah, I think the email meeting, I mean, as long as they're public, right, and there's a record kept of them,
Right, right.
then they're okay. But so yeah,
But all of our emails have records, so then you could say everything is an email meeting.
right.
I have had some issues with the email because of requests that have been made via email. And so I think this would actually cause board members to cause some problems for the organization. And I would just rather we get clarity on how this gets used, how it gets called, how it gets clarified, because technically everything could be an email meeting. It's just one long standing meeting indefinitely. So.
Okay. So we are at 1 hour, a little just, is there anything else that we want to highlight? So far, I understand that Camille is going to add the additional changes of Gino and other board members, Michelle, updates or issues that they wanted inserted, and that will go in the side-by-side. And we're using the side-by-side as a working document as we work through this. Obviously, it's not going to be the final document. And so we have highlighted the specific things that we think, at least from our perspective, need some time and attention, and for us to put together a recommendation that we then present to the rest of the board. So is that where we're at?
Susan, the only thing you didn't capture was that you also asked for page numbers on that document.
Oh, yeah, that's just, yeah. Okay. So do we want to take on at least one of those issues and see how far we can get today? Why don't we do the election? Because that's something that everyone has agreed needs to have some changes.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Okay. Michelle, do you have anything, do you have any thoughts or recommendations? What page is that? Let's see, not what page, which number was that?
Article 3 or 3.1.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I would just really like to make sure we're being thoughtful about establishing a process that is efficient, fair, and I kind of feel like, you know, maybe organic isn't the word I want to use, but I just want to make sure every board member who wants or has interest or, you know, in a position is given that fair shake. And it sounds like from history that may not always have been the case. And for whatever reason, I wasn't involved, so I don't have any background on that part of it. But I just want to make sure that whatever process we put in place, so, you know, what I'm used to from my school board days is, you know, every board member would be given an opportunity to nominate somebody, and it may be the same person that somebody else nominated. But you go through that process, and then you go through the voting process once you've identified the, you know, the parties that have interest. And that way everybody's out there, you know, everyone knows who those people are, and you're just kind of going through a process of elimination, for lack of a better word,
Right.
to get to your final result.
Yeah, I agree with you. Certainly something that isn't as awkward as what's happened so far. Has there ever been a history? I know something that I've been familiar with that works, and this is a small board, so it's not as easy, but that there's sort of a nominations committee that takes on the responsibility of saying who's interested, who's the positions, so that it's done prior to a meeting. You know, people know that these are the people who have expressed interest, and this is the officers that the committee or the group is recommending, and are there any additional nominations? This may be too small of a group for that, but they're tasked with making sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak up or.
Yeah. So you're saying that that committee would go to each board member and just say, do you have interest in a position? Which position do you have interest in? And then. Or
whether it's the president or someone, just say, we are going to be nominating, you know, this position, and people express interest or nominate someone. Is that prior to a meeting, or can we do that prior to a meeting?
Michelle, for your board experience, if you had 7 board members, all 7 would name one person. And if they were all 7 the same, fine, you would still go into a discussion and a vote. But if you had 7 people naming 7 different people, then how would you proceed from there?
Never really faced that situation. There aren't usually 7 that want to jump into that, but I mean, I think you would just have to go through a vote, right? So you would have to go through the vote on the first and see how that shakes out, go through the vote on the second, and, you know, eventually you would get down, but it could be pretty lengthy if you have all 7 interested in one spot.
And then just to be fair, Dawn has mentioned a star system, which hopefully everybody knows what that means, but basically kind of a cascading effect of votes. So just wanted to make sure we put that on kind of the record of possibilities. So, and Susan, I like your idea, but I think this group is too small, and I think that just adds a lot of labor that maybe Michelle's proposal can cover. I also feel like we're kind of too small for Dawn's recommendation for the star kind of cascading effect. Although I do like that system, I just don't think it's appropriate for the small of a venue. So maybe Michelle, yours creates that transparency and sort of organic discussion that maybe you were looking for. Is there anything besides maybe every person voting for themselves or whatever that I've submitted as a possible issue, is there anything else that would be an issue if we went that route? And maybe there's I don't know, I'll just stop there.
Well, I mean, at some point you're going to have, I highly doubt you'll get 7 people at one time interested in being the board chair. You know,
or any position.
or any, I mean, it could happen, but
Yeah.
I would say that would be highly unusual.
Right. We'd have all kinds of other problems to address if that was happening, but let's
Yeah,
say, okay, we're all on different pages. We have to get to majority somewhere. And then, like you said, you'll get there. But I'm just trying to think, are there other issues like, you know, hurt feelings that somebody who wanted to be nominated didn't get nominated at all? Or, I mean, is there anything else that would create kind of board division that would be counterproductive? I'm just sort of picking your idea apart just to make sure we've been thoughtful.
I think part of that nomination process is you can always nominate yourself. Right. I think we have to leave that open as an option. You know, I don't know. It's just one of those things that I've never really had it be a problem. You know, it's just always worked. And so,
Well, are we trying to fix something because it didn't work properly last time? But if it couldn't it work properly, just as, I mean, hasn't it in the past been that people either nominate someone or nominate themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is we've been trying to nominate to nominate a vice president for like 4 months and haven't been able to get there. So I think we want to kind of review the process a little bit to make sure it was working.
Right.
Just identify a process. We don't really have a process, but what I want to do is I want to really be mindful of Don's, you know, he's expressed more than once his frustrations with how the voting has gone in the past. And I just want to make sure we're being sensitive to that and addressing it. Right. And I think just not having a process leaves it open for
delays.
Right.
You know, any kind of process to play.
Yeah. I think the reason we have taken so long to nominate a vice chair is because the process that took place was improper. So now we're having to go back and fix it. And I think that's where the awkwardness started. If it had just been open to the floor, anyone want to nominate someone or someone nominate themselves and there be a vote. I think that's the process that's happened previously. I think that's, Michelle, what you're expressing now. So that's why I'm asking, are we just looking at a incident and trying to correct it when in fact it was the incident? And, you know, it just happened, people. So I think we're trying to correct something because there was an incident that we're all remembering when in fact the process, I don't know, maybe the process in the past hasn't worked, I don't know.
Well, I also want to make sure that we're being transparent in this process. Mm-hmm. And there's not any premeditated conversations. I really think it should just start at the meeting, be mm-hmm. open at the meeting.
Great.
You know.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I mean, over in the history is, you know, it's predetermined who's going to nominate who and how, you know, and who's, who's interested in whatever prior to the board meeting, you know.
So by committee without a committee.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, and you know, that isn't always great, but it's expedient. Right.
I mean, yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So I think Susan, well said, Michelle, good thoughts, and Mark, good additions to that, all good topics of consideration. So I think what we just do is need to add some clarity around the process we already have, and then address things that have caused the delays, like board vacancies have caused delays, improper, you know, one improper incident that has been addressed. You know, how to deal with that is like, oh, we did that incorrectly, and now we're going to just redo the vote right now. Right. I mean, maybe there's just some clarity on like how do you get past these delays rather than restructuring the whole thing? So that's my 2 cents on just keeping this efficient.
And then we decided we wanted to wait for our 2 new board members to join.
Right.
So we had full board decision on this, which I'm totally in support of.
So maybe we put something in here that says if we don't have, you know, at least 6 people of our 7 filled, then we delay the vote, or, you know, the 2 new board members can't be eligible to run for 6 months or something. And then that eliminates, you know, well, who's the next board member going to be? And maybe they're a good chair. So I think those sort of things are why we're delayed. So maybe we just figure out a way to just target that specifically and move on without restructuring the whole thing.
I think it's really important that you put together policies or bylaws on general practice, not on exceptions, because then, you know, you're looking at an exception, trying to fix it rather than this is the practice that we believe is best. And I think that's what I'd like to recommend that we do. So,
I agree. And I think we keep it simple. I think a lot of what we're dealing with right now is a really, you know, not a common occurrence.
yeah,
We've
that's
just
what I'm
kind of
saying.
had a comedy of things happen, and
Right.
we need to deal with that and we need to correct it. But I don't know that we need to, you know, I see too many things changed to the extreme because of an incident that would never happen again. Right.
Yeah, I think
think
this
we
was
can-
the result of a perfect storm.
Right.
of a
And you can
number
handle
of
those at the board
things.
level, right? We have a conversation about the
Right.
misstep or what, you know, I mean, yeah, there was one and we know that, and
Mhm.
you know, this is what we need to do to fix it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I just, you know, for transparency, I think that Caitlin did a great job of responding to it and owning it. And so I think it's reasonable to go to the policy and the practice that's been in place. We may clarify it a little more, but yeah.
I think that's great. And then I also appreciated that the midterm vacancy was addressed as well, because I was a little bit disappointed that the way that was handled was we can't have like an interim person until the board was filled or something like that. Because of course someone could step up to be treasurer and then step down, and that would cause the same issue as actually just stating it in the bylaws. So I think we're getting closer. I think it's just a little more detail on what we already have, and we're close. So how do we close the loop on it, or do we want a little more time with it before we settle?
Well, I think we agree in principle of what we would like to recommend. So do we draft the language? Camille, do you draft the language? I don't think.
Yeah,
it's a
I
draft,
think
but-
as we talk through it, you know, Camille, take notes and we'll come back with updated language for you. I mean, you know,
Right.
so, you know, as you guys kind of coalesce around an idea, we can put that together and bring it back and see if we captured what you were thinking.
Okay. Do we need a motion on that, or we just say thumbs up and we know what we're doing here?
I don't think we have to vote on anything. I think it's just getting this document put back together with Camille's
And then
help,
it'll be a
and
vote
then
of the
maybe
board.
we vote on a final draft to go to the board or something.
Okay, well, so we can check off that one. That's good.
Go team, that's exciting.
Yeah, so we have about a half an hour left. Which one do we want to tackle next? Somewhere I have my notes about the things that we discussed.
I think one that's going to be kind of challenging that maybe we want to start on and see how far we get is sort of the roles of the chair and then the roles of the committee members. I think that might actually resolve a lot of other things if we start there instead of try to avoid it and come back to it.
Sure. Okay, so that's so in a half an hour.
Michelle, do you agree? Is that okay? To...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. Does someone want to start?
Well, I think for me, are we on 3.3 sort of authorities and responsibilities of officer positions? Is that sort of where we land on this. I just want to make sure we're tackling the right section.
I think that's where we are, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like this section, and maybe because of the delegation to the different, in the staff, the delegation to staff, doesn't really make this feel very authentic. And so I think I want to capture what we would like to see, rather than what we're doing. Does that make sense? Sort of like, what's the intention, rather than, here's all of your list of duties, but really that's going to so-and-so. And the other part that I have a concern or issue about is, if I were the president, I would feel very, I don't want to say put upon, but there is a lot of obligations for the president. And I think that is a really unfair responsibility that they carry.
So I have a kind of something I've been chewing over on that. And it really ties to the chair and vice chair. In my history, the vice chair has played a pretty significant part in offloading some of those duties or supporting those duties. But we all have different skill sets that we bring to this board, and that's the value of having 7 very different people, right? We have areas that we're stronger in than others. And so I'm wondering if we can kind of have maybe not all those responsibilities fall on the vice chair to support the chair, but there's a delegation at the chair level that says, Michelle does this for a living. I'd like her to help me review contracts. Emily does this for a living. I'd like her to help me with this. You know what I mean? And just be more thoughtful in how we manage some of those more delicate or detailed obligations. The board chair may not be as what's the word I want to use, as skilled as some of us at contract reading or different components. I'm just wondering if we can just add a piece that says they can call upon this person to help instead of just relying on the vice chair.
Yeah, I thought that was inherent, but maybe we need to be more specific about that. So, and I also would be careful that we don't assume that we're creating that description based on different people's ability to delegate and people's ability to know what everyone else is good at or not so good at. So maybe there's a way that we can structure it that says, you will delegate X, Y, and Z, with the board's discretion or approval. I mean, I think there's a way to capture that, but I would hope that would be happening just by nature of being in that leadership role.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure right now, my experience so far has been that the board chair kind of feels like they're responsible for every aspect of being the board chair.
When you read this, that's how it reads. And I think we've all offered our assistance multiple times, and I haven't gotten anything new delegated to me other than being a part of this ad hoc. And so my concern is that if you're really good at delegating, then you could have a president who does nothing. And if you're really unskilled at delegating, then you could have everything. So how do we build that structure?
Balance.
Right.
Well, I think we need to talk about this in terms of the position and not personalities of who may or may not be there. So from my perspective, the expertise of different people on the board, that's in the committee structure. So the contracts person, that's where someone with expertise in that, it's at a committee level. And so one of the things I think would be helpful is that I am confused. We keep saying chair, but it's really president. So guess we need to have a common language here. But that the president's role and responsibility is to chair the meetings, that they work with the general manager to facilitate setting up the agenda and so on. So I would like to recommend that somewhere in there, the president can or does appoint the committees, but that there be something that goes to board members to request, what committee would you like to serve on? Where are your areas of experience and expertise? I just think that would be a beneficial process to go through. But I think that I think we need to really revisit the proposed changes, because as I think it was one of the slides last week, it says president of the board instead of the board of directors. And I think from my experience in the last however many months we've been here, it seems like when there is a declaration that the board determines something, in reality, it's been the board chair, when it should be the full board. So I would not agree with the board chair being as written here, that they are the liaison to the general manager, because that really makes the rest of the board sort of superfluous. And it seems like a rubber stamp kind of position, which I don't think any of us should be interested in. So I think that the role of the president, as the current policy has it, I'd like to stay with that. We may need to sharpen it up, but expanding the role as it is provided here, I don't support that.
Susan, are you saying?
If it's helpful, I'm sorry, Emily.
Go ahead,
If
Camille.
it's helpful, the APTA board members handbook does have a description of the standard best practices of board president responsibilities. And I'm happy to send that out to all of you to reference as a guideline as you think about this.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and I think not having the president as a liaison between the general manager and the board would be very difficult to manage. So, we have to have, general manager has to have somebody on the board that is a go-between between the board and the general manager. So, and the president has always been that individual, and should be. I mean, that's why you elect a president. Now, it isn't necessarily that, we're making board decisions, but, we are having discussions up front about, how we are, going to approach whatever issues. And so I think it'd be very difficult to say, well, that can't be the liaison. There's no liaison, when there really has to be. So that's my comments.
I think that, yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. This reminds me of the Carver model, where the board has one employee and it's the general manager, and that's the only communication that takes place. And I think that's really a flawed system. It doesn't give opportunity for the rest of the board and or staff to build relationships. Certainly there needs to be appropriate boundaries of what kind of information and so on takes place. But I feel like in the last few months, we've had so many times that decisions have been made. And I'm not talking about liaison in terms of being the communicator, that the rest of us, the rest of the board members, had no input in. And this seems to strengthen that even more.
I'm going to ask my original question that I didn't get to yet. My question was going to be, as we try to create a more practical approach for the president's roles and responsibilities, is there a way that we sort of inherently delegate that authority to say, and the vice president is the point of contact for these three things, so that when we do board elections, we have a much better sense of what that role actually is? Because I'm going to tell you, I was approached at one point about being the president of this board, and I was told my only job would be you just have to be good at running a board meeting. And I think that is such a selling short of what is actually required of the president at this time. And I think we just have this disconnect of what's portrayed as the role and what actually is the role, that this is our opportunity to create that clarity and to say, this is a diplomatic process and it's not the president making decisions with the GM that may or may not have consensus of the board. And Mark, I think for your role, it would be really helpful. It might be slower, but it might be more helpful that you have that consensus up front, because we're not representing the community if the president is making decisions outside of the board's at least knowledge or consensus. And I don't think that's happening all the time, or at least not on purpose, but it does feel like decisions get made and you're like, oh, I had no idea we were even discussing that, or that it had been discussed. So I'm just trying to break down that communication a little bit more in a way that's helpful, but also still productive.
I kind of think this is maybe a little bit of a different discussion outside of the board chair's role, but more about communication. And that's one of the things on my list of things I'd really like to see us really beef up our communication policy, because I think that's where we were really lacking. And I think that's where these concerns are coming from. You know, I've chaired boards before, and my philosophy has always been, just because I'm the board chair doesn't mean I should be the only one making decisions. And I would check in with my fellow board members on things if I just, you know, just maybe, you know, they might have a different perspective. They might have something to offer I'm not thinking about. They're just, you know, there's a time to make the decision because you need to, right, in the moment. And then there's a time where you have to say, you know, this decision really shouldn't be mine alone. I really should run this by the rest of the board and make sure that we're all in sync with this decision. Mm-hmm. A big one being, obviously, I think we all know, it's the removal of our general counsel that fostered a lot of this, the feelings that we're having right now on it. So I think we have to be careful to take away the chair's ability to make decisions when they need to, but we also have to put something in place that says board members will be included in, you know, some of those more major events, right? We want to have a say. And if, you know, if nothing else, the communication, if we send a communication to the general manager that says we want to have a special meeting to discuss this, or we send that to the chair and ask our chair to have that conversation with the general manager, then we need to know that there will be a response to that request. I feel like that's more where we're trying to go with that. And I could be wrong, but that's just kind of my.
Michelle, I think you said that, I think you articulated that really well. I guess the one thing I do feel is that I don't think the board chair or president should have the authority to make any decisions on behalf of the board alone. And so that's something that I feel we all have the same, I've said this repeatedly, I know, I'm sorry, but we have the same fiduciary responsibility. So I really want to make sure that I at least know about it and that we all have the same information at the same time. So when you look at what are the responsibilities of boards within the Oregon kind of statute that governs boards, we have that responsibility, and it is not a president or a chair, it is the board. And I think we really need to begin to honor that in a more, I agree, we've gone away from that. That isn't what we've experienced, but it goes, this codifies 3.31, codifies the way it's been happening now. And I don't support it. So I think that it's important if all the board members are involved with decisions, because that supports the general manager and their staff. It means that, you know, we're all in agreement on it. And we're not always going to agree, but then we have an opportunity to discuss it and vote on it. And once a decision's made, it's our responsibility to support that decision. But to not have any opportunity to discuss it, that's improper.
So give me, so I don't, and I'm kind of lost here because there's no binding decisions that any single board member can make without a vote of the board. And so I'm trying to figure out what decisions that, you feel are being made without, that are binding, that the board should have, weighed in on.
Well, the big one that I think about is the firing and hiring of new general counsel.
That was a general manager decision, not a board president decision.
So
Right, I think we're blurring that line. And that's why I'm trying to say, I think this is a different, I think this is more about communication and authority. So that authority was taken by the general manager. It wasn't taken by our board president. And I think we need to make sure that's, that's clear, because otherwise that puts us in a position that isn't, one, accurate, and two, is not good.
But there were certainly decisions made by the president that was not supported by the rest of people on the board. Certainly asking to have the former general counsel available to ask questions about the report. That was a decision that was made by the president. So that's one example. I do think,
and again, that was a general manager decision, not a board president decision.
So, Mark,
No,
I don't
that's
know
not
if you were
correct.
part of the conversation, but there was a request that certain people attend an executive session, and the decision was made within the bounds of the bylaws that the president made a decision on, that the rest of the board accepted, but didn't necessarily agree with. So that would be one example. I would say agenda setting would be another. And so I think that's why when you delivered the board decisions for 2022 at the retreat, I think it was so well appreciated, because we all said, great, now we have a working agenda. So if we do have agenda items, we have a better way of getting ahead of putting something on there. But I feel like I have to fight tooth and nail to get anything onto an agenda. And I feel like that's a very much a president chair responsibility, that everyone gets represented in some capacity on the board agenda.
Well, and typically agendas are driven by staff, not the board.
Well, then maybe that's the problem instead.
You look at every and that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a process for board members to get things on board meetings, but the general manager is charged with running the district, right? I mean, the day-to-day stuff. And so there's decisions that we know that are coming up, and, contracts and things that we have to plan out and that we know have to go to the board. Now, if the board just decides, well, no, we don't want to do any of that, we want to have our own agendas, right? Then none of the work of the district will actually get done. And that's extreme, but, it's like, okay, where's the balance, I guess. And I think there's been some frustration on board members that I don't know how to get anything on the agenda, right? And it's like, well, yeah. And I think if you look at like city council, a single board member or a single counselor cannot get anything on the agenda. It has to be supported by other
Sure.
counselors.
So Mark, you said a couple of good things. One was balance, and I think that's all that we're looking for in the bylaws is balance, so that a staff member can drive the agenda just as much as a board or a few board members can help drive the agenda. I don't think we're looking for totalitarianism on one side or the other. And then you also said something like, and then we'd have to go back to the board. Well, you run the district, but we're also decision makers for this organization. So we'd like to feel like that a little bit more in some areas that we're not kind of getting that right now. So I think I think balance is the word that I think is absolutely perfect for this part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think I take some exception, Mark, to, and maybe that's the culture of LTD, but I take exception to the notion that the board does not set the agenda for the board meetings. It is a board meeting. And certainly with the assistance, the recommendation, the expertise of the staff, of course. But to say that the board doesn't set the agenda for the board meetings, I don't agree with that.
It's the only way it can work, Susan. So if I decide, okay, the staff is not going to do anything with agendas, we're just going to turn it over to the board. The board can decide how they whatever agenda they want. That's unworkable.
Mark,
Staff absolutely has to.
Excuse me, you're misrepresenting what I said. I said with the guidance, the recommendation, and the support of the staff. But when you said earlier, the board does not set the agenda for the board meetings, that's where I said I take exception to that. And will everything that a board member requests be on the agenda? No, of course not. But at the same time, it's a partnership. So I think that's the piece that I'd like to see. I have a recommendation or suggestion about the vice president. What if the vice president's role includes being the person that coordinates, not that determines who are the different committees, but that they are sort of, they manage or coordinate the various committees with the committee chairs. Is that something that would be helpful and would eliminate some strain on the position of the president?
I think go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, so I just looking for some clarification. Are you suggesting that instead of the chair identifying board members for those committees, that the vice chair would do so?
No.
Okay.
But the president would identify them, but then in the course of the working year, that maybe perhaps the vice president could take on the responsibility of making sure that the meetings are taking place, or they be the conduit, so it doesn't all have to go to the president. I mean, that was just a suggestion when we were talking about how can we relieve the president of having to do so many of the activities, and making the vice president be something other than just,
Yeah, I think the vice president needs to have a more active role than just a title.
And that, I guess that's what I was trying to suggest might be, one of those things. Before the meetings where the committees are supposed to report about any meetings that they've been a part of, perhaps if that's something the vice chair could connect with each of the committee chairs and say, are you ready? Are you going to be prepared? Maybe that doesn't need to happen, but it seems like that could be a role that could be helpful in a supportive position.
I think that, Susan, so you're capturing something that would be really helpful, is that we do have a really short opportunity to report back on what our committees have done, but sometimes it's been 3 or 4 weeks since we've met, and multiple things have happened since that time. So it'd be nice to have some way to sort of get like a really clear kind of liaison piece from the committees back up, so that it is more efficient for the board to say, now the contract committee reviewed this and we approved it, and here's the 2 takeaways from that. Let's discuss and approve or review. And then the other thing I would say, maybe just based on this conversation, is maybe we have the vice president be the liaison for the board members, and say the president and the vice president go to agenda setting meetings, and the vice president gets to say, and we get to add 10 minutes for whatever, board members have on their minds, or maybe add a 10-minute conversation moment. And maybe there's a way that we can kind of break down that communication issue a little bit in a formal way on the agenda, but maybe a little bit more informal when needed. So maybe there's a way that we use that vice president role for sort of multiple liaison facets.
Yeah, I mean, I reflect back on where my experience has been, right? And as vice chair of the school board, I was involved in the agenda setting meetings, and I think that brought real value because it was an additional voice, additional perspective, and it provides some of that balance. But you know, we still have to be comfortable as board members with our vice chair being that representative, right? So if we go down that road, I guess my only caution is that we reflect back on some of our concerns that have been expressed, and that, you know, the board feels represented, because that's what we're lacking right now, is the board doesn't feel represented in those conversations. Right. So I think we really need to focus on how we as a board find balance with what we need, and the district, you know, we need the district to run its business right, and they need to tell us what that business is. That's what a lot of the agenda is them telling us where we need to support in decision making. But we, you know, I'd like to go back a little bit to the piece about not getting anything on agendas, because I do think there have been some times in the last 6 months that some requests have been made that have been legitimate, and we probably should have made time on the agenda for those conversations to happen. I think we would have alleviated a lot of frustration if we'd done that earlier. And I feel like a lot of what we're talking about is really related to, again, a perfect storm of situations that have occurred. And I don't want to overcompensate for that, but I do want to make sure that we put that balance in place.
Right.
Michelle, you said something helpful earlier about delegating. And so I think maybe what we're trying to say in this conversation about roles and the bylaws is maybe there's a way that says one of the other executive roles, their duties include X, Y, and Z. And we maybe do that delegation up front to say, we would like the president to select the committees and the makeup of those committees, but we want the vice president to do X, Y, and Z in regards to managing those committees. And the treasurer maybe meets offline with the contract committee chair and with someone on the finance team on a, you know, somewhat regular basis. And the secretary meets with the clerk of the board and says, hey, this is what we want the agenda packets to look like. And so we're not creating more work, we're just creating more efficiency within the workflow itself by delegating in advance, rather than saying, well, Susan wants this and Michelle wants that and Emily wants this. And we all ask for 3 different things and waste a bunch of time, to Mark's point about sort of being ineffective because we're not cohesive. So maybe there's a way to resolve much of that just through simple delegation and a retraining of the role itself.
Yeah, I just want to be really thoughtful and careful that we don't overstep, you know, into areas that we shouldn't. We do need the staff and the general manager to guide us, you know, through those necessary decisions and you know, some of that agenda stuff. But I do think that if there's a request made, we do need to make room for that conversation.
Yeah, and we used to have an item on the agenda every month to say future board requested items, you know, board meeting agenda items. And I think when Carl was president, he removed that. And so certainly we could put that back on so we could plan accordingly and give the board an opportunity at each board member to say, well, you know, I'd like to see this come up on a, you know, at a future board meeting or the next board meeting or whatever, and we can, you know, plan them out accordingly. I mean, our board meetings are pretty packed and pretty full. And, you know, we're constantly moving things around or you know, so, you know, and the discussion at some point may be, we need longer board meetings, right? And which is, you know, fine. But anyway, that might be one option to be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
I think that's a great suggestion, Mark. And I have to say, I mean, I'm not crazy about having a lot of meetings, but I do think there have been times the meetings going along and then we're not able to, you know, last time we weren't able to hear Tiffany's report because too much time had gone on. And that when those things happen, that maybe the meeting does have to be extended. We wouldn't want to have that happen every time, but, you know, certainly when it does. I think that, Michelle, what you're saying with regard to the concern about are we creating something and having to do it very thoughtfully, I agree. I think that we also don't want to set up a two-tier system, that just one more layer between the board and the rest of the stuff that's happening. We are at 12 o'clock or very near it. So I think we made good progress today. I guess we pick up next time again on the role of the board president. Should we set up a date for our next meeting while we're all here? I would say probably after the first of the year, right?
I was gonna say the week between Christmas and New Year's isn't terrible for me, but I don't want to commit anybody else to that. So maybe we say like the week of the 3rd.
Yeah, that last week of the year is total chaos for me at work. So
I could do Monday the 3rd, like 2 to 3:30 or 2 to 4.
What time of day works for people, or does that matter?
Oh, good question. I was gonna say, as long as I have it on the calendar far enough in advance, I can
Right.
kind of make anything work, but I want to
for
be
me,
respectful.
any start time between like 11 and 1 is better.
Okay.
It gives me a little time to situate things in the morning at work, and then, so
I'm gonna do like 12 to 2 on the 3rd, if that works for everybody.
I have a meeting at noon on the 3rd. I'm always a little reluctant to have meetings on Monday, not knowing what in the world's going to happen over the weekend. What about on the 4th at 11, Tuesday?
We have a conflict on our internal calendar on the 4th, but the 5th is a good day if that were to work.
Okay, I'll copy a meeting on the 5th from 9 to 12.
that's a board meeting day too. I can't do a meeting on a board meeting day. That's just too much time away from work.
On the 5th?
Yeah.
Mark, you're muted.
Yeah, it's a work session on the 5th. Yeah, so.
Do you think, so back to the 3rd, is that a possibility? Because I think it'd be nice if we could have some progress for the board working group on the 5th. Michelle, does after everything I said about Monday, that a possibility for you?
Yeah, I could do the 3rd from 11 to 1 or 12 to 2.
I'll move my other meeting around, so.
Me too. Camille, does that work for you guys on the 3rd, 11 to 1 or 12 to 2?
Yes.
Any strong preference either way?
Well, either of those times work.
I'd prefer 12 to 2, but I can make 11 to 1 work as well.
I would prefer 12 to 2 as well.
So the 3rd, wow, that's not that long. So we're saying from 12 to 2.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're at time, but do we want to identify maybe some homework for us to be prepared for that meeting? I know we want to continue this discussion, but maybe reading the policy related to the board GM agreement might help us continue this conversation.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. And as soon as we get the updated documents from Camille, maybe that will give us, maybe we can at that point review some of the changes that thankfully Camille is going to help with.
So do we want to send the policy handbook to you guys too, just so you have that if you don't?
I wonder if we should send it to everybody. I know that if I weren't on this committee, I'd want to just at least be mindful of what I might want to be at least somewhat keeping top of mind, so that when this does go before the board, it's not like the first time everyone's seeing this policy, or why we're making a policy suggestion at the same time we're making a bylaw suggestion. So I'd say everybody should get it, but that's.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean,
Okay,
they
thank
have
you.
access to it anyway, but it's just a matter of putting it in their hands.
Just a reminder of, maybe read this instead of that, or.
And they
Yeah.
suggested that the committee will be reviewing this as part of the bylaws
Sure.
review.
Sure. Does it make any sense to set, never mind. I was gonna say, should we send the up side by side to the full board as we get it? But I think let's continue to craft some more before we send it out to them. So if we are able to meet on the 3rd and then have some things added to it, that they can have it by the meeting on the 5th. Is that a good objective? Camille and Mark, is that doable or reasonable?
If not the 5th, we can certainly do it at the board meeting, the 3rd Wednesday. So.
Okay, that
Sounds
sounds
good.
good.
Thanks, Mark and Camille. We
Okay.
appreciate you guys. I know this is kind of interesting discussion, so appreciate you guys hanging in there with us.
Yes, agreed.
Yes, good discussions.
Everybody, yeah. Thanks, everybody. If we don't talk before,
Thank you.
I guess we are, never mind. I was gonna say happy holidays.
We're talking next week.
Yeah.
I know.
And then
No,
Susan
the
will
movie
share, so
ahead
don't
is this week still. Oh my
don't forget to
goodness.
adjourn us.
Yeah.
Yes, so anything else? I would like to end the meeting. So thank you, everyone. The meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.